So, in a previous video, I said that I was essentially a slave. That's true. There has been a system of slavery in the United States throughout. It was in the original Constitution that you were shown in 1789. The Constitution they will not show you is the one from 1775, which is our genuine one. The Three-Fifths Compromise, for example, was the only way they could conceive of to spell it out in the Constitution, but they knew that there would someday be some kind of a reckoning for that. They didn't want to have to spell it out, but they were forced to by the Indian nation, which is why they were punished later after the Civil War. That is why the United States went after the Indian nation, is because the Indian nation instigated the Civil War by calling out the colonies for being inconsistent with what they said they believed in. And if you think that there was like a clear separation between natives and the colonies or even the states later on, you are mistaken. The American Indian and those who moved into the westward expansion, even into Ohio Valley and Missouri, into the mid 1700s, into the early 1800s and beyond, they intermarried heavily with the native population, and the natives were ruthlessly questioning why, if they were a Christian nation, because they understood Jesus, because they had stories about him, they remembered him, why would the United States allow slavery if it was against that law of the Creator? And it was contrary to the circle of life to have a slave and not to work for your own progress and benefit. It was robbing yourself and it was robbing someone else at the same time. It was robbing you of your experience in life, and if you were a slave owner, and as a slave, it was robbing you from the benefit of your experience. So it's a two-way robbery, and there is no winner in this scenario any way you cut it. And so the abolitionist movement, when it really began to pick up steam and move on, they always just kind of said that it was heavy in Kansas because, well, that was a new state, and they had a question about whether or not they were going to have slaves, and so that was a flashpoint. Wrong. That was a flashpoint because that's where many of the Plains Indians were, and they were outright jeering and calling out the whites for claiming to believe in the God Jesus, but not following him. Which was naturally a problem for those who wanted to keep the system of slavery. The Civil War was fought to settle a disagreement between which system of slavery to keep, not to abolish slavery. It was which system of slavery to keep. The South wanted to keep their agrarian slave society, where they were living in a plantation configuration, and the North wanted a slave society that was corporatized, where they would give you the minimum possible benefit for the fruits of your labor, even milking down to a very exact penny what they would take from you and giving you the minimum amount required for your subsistence, which is why it is still that way, because that's the system that won out. There were later improvements that were made upon it, but returning to that, the Corporation of the United States of America was established in 1864, and its first act was to charge Abraham Lincoln with treason for the Emancipation Proclamation, citing that it was unconstitutional in nature, because there existed the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Civil War was indeed fought on a basis of states' rights because the states wanted to determine which system of slavery they wanted to keep, not whether they wanted to keep it, but which one. Because they could only have one apparent system in order to maintain the Union due to problems with the interstate commerce clauses of the Constitution, where contracts are valid one state to the next. You can't have two different systems of slavery under that. The agrarian model was that the master of the plantation directly owned the slaves, but the corporate model was that there would be an abstraction layer called a corporation, which would be granted personhood and therefore ownership of the slave population under its domain, which would be deemed employees and tracked by a serial number. The serial number was conceived of then, but only implemented in a meaningful way later, when it could be figured out how to logically complete an information system at that scale. And IBM was the solution provider to that problem in deep consultation, and the yield of it was the Social Security number. Fast forward to today's date, there's a reason why corporations want to see your Social Security number on employment, and it is not because they're so concerned about the pittance that they take out of your check in terms of taxes. Most people don't even pay taxes. If you get a tax return, that means you don't pay federal taxes. So why the hell do you have to supply a Social Security number? Well, the reason is because when you agree to employment of that employer then owns your output completely, because you are agreeing to a contract of slavery to that employer, and that is why that employer is entitled to abridge your constitutional rights, namely those mentioned in the Bill of Rights. So yes, when I said that I was technically and really a slave to corporate America, I was. I worked at Nationwide, I worked at AIG, I worked at Office Depot, I worked at Wendy's, and on and on. Worked for Amazon too. Were they always on the level? Did they treat me like they owned me? Sometimes. Amazon was the best place I ever really worked as far as a corporate structure goes. I liked it okay. But did they cross the line with me? Oh yes, yes they did. I'm not getting into that. It's not important, not right now. But the system of slavery under the Corporation of the United States of America is alive and well. And who are the ultimate beneficiaries of the United States system of slavery? Really? Who benefits from military protection, which is indeed laying down your very life for protection of an organization or entity? Are we protecting our country, military? Before July 24th this year, were we protecting our country? No. We were protecting Europe. And our country was busy being infiltrated up to the eyeballs with those seeking to subvert and destroy our way of life so they could claim everything we had and take it for themselves. Many of those got here and just decided that, well, hell, you don't need to do that. You just need to be an American like everyone else who's here and trying to make it. It was an easy sell. It's better than what they had. And they got here and they opened their eyes and they looked around and they went, oh, there's a lot of good people here. There's a lot of stupid people. But there's a lot of good people, and they'll give you their shirt off their back if they feel like that will help you. There's also a lot of selfish people here, and the stupid people and the selfish people. Between the two, well, damn, that's 2/3, and you just gave our country away. Look what you have done. We fought, the military and me, we fought, we got it back. Slavery is abolished. We severed the tie to our European masters. They're pissed, but we did damage certain that they will not be able to retaliate. You may not know. And going forward, it is certain that our way of life in this system is at an end. It is coming down very soon and very rapidly. I'm not going to give you a date, but I am going to tell you that it's a good time to steadily, in an orderly way, stock up on your food storage. Forget gold and silver, you can't eat it. If you don't have tons and tons of money, don't worry about even converting your dollar into anything else. Rubles is a good choice if you do, but if you don't, if you have less than $500,000 in the bank, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The main issue that you're going to run into is you're not going to be able to buy cheap shit from China anymore. And I don't know if you've been to a store lately, but they have a problem with the system of slavery there too, which is controlled by the West, namely Europe also. And they're cutting the cord at the same time we are. Exactly the same time. So is the rest of the world. None of us are subservient to the European Union. And the European Union and the United States are like unto each other, going to feel greatly diminished, even rapidly, and for a sustained period of time, until such time that which they may establish their own production, means of production, and production of food, and until that time, at which they're standing on their own 2 feet and not on the backs of the bruised and the meek, things are going to be tough, as bad or worse than the Great Depression. If you grew up without much, this isn't that scary at all. If you grew up anything like me, then you know that a little bit of struggle yields a lot of growth. It also creates the conditions by which you meet other people like you, who are working through issues like you. And that's how you make the best friends you've ever had. You struggle together, you help each other out, you grow together. You will get to know your neighbors, I guarantee it. Because right now, nobody does. Nobody's looking to their community to help them with anything, because everybody is on the teat of a corporate feeder. And that system is dying. And when it goes, it's going to go all at once. It's a good time to get good at praying. If you don't believe in God, what do you believe in? Evolution? Ask yourself this: how did the first cell come to be, and how did it survive? if you think even it was the primordial ooze in a fucking lightning strike, then what did it eat? And who was its mate? Then go look at a cell and actually study it and find and count how many interactive components it has to have working in tandem just to complete a cycle of respiration, of interaction of organs, if you could call them organs. They would be intracellular. How did it get the cell wall? Does a lightning bolt do that? Or are you looking at the instantiation of a design? If you're a software engineer, a programmer, or anybody kind of engineer, you know that in order to build anything and have it work, it has to have a pattern, a design, or a class. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, then you don't just start out with linear code, procedural code, although it kind of looks that way after a while, but you start out with a class. And then what do you have to have in order to instantiate the class? You have to have a main, and the main is a procedural function that instantiates the application. Say, for example, you're working with Java. Something has to call up and instantiate the whole application as an object. It has to have a container for the object given, which is the persistent system state it's in, or the Java VM, so it has to have at least an environment, and it has to have a class. Then once you have that, you can create an instance, which is called, once you instantiate it, an object. And that object, you may have any number of that type of class of objects. However, each one is inherently unique because each method, each function, each property is contained in its own memory space. And depending on the object-oriented language you program in, that could be managed many different ways, which indicates there's even other functions and systems that are required to even have a system in the first place. Well, creation's the same way. So the only real paradox, then, is where did God come from? Use it. Have a good one.